Hi again, and welcome back to Platonic Soul. I hope you've been well. I thought I'd start today by asking you to imagine something. Imagine a procession of people, boys and girls, men and women, making their way to a temple. They're leading a specially chosen sheep or a goat or some other animal. The people are in their finest clothing and cleanest clothing, and they have wreaths on their heads. They're walking barefoot, though. The animal is also decked out with ribbons and garlands. An aristocratic girl leads the way with a precious basket on her head, sometimes made of silver or gold plate. Everyone walks in rhythm, led by a piper and other musicians. When they reach the temple, they stand in a semicircle facing the altar. The altar's outside the temple, with the temple at their backs. There's a fire burning. Someone carries a jug of water and the ornate basket counterclockwise around the altar. The man who's officiating at this rite sprinkles the people and the altar and the animal with water, causing it to make a nodding notion so that it seems to give assent to what's about to happen. He says a prayer, and the people then all reach into the basket where they find barley grains. They throw the barley grains over the animal and the altar, and then the officiant takes a knife, which had been hiding in the basket, underneath the barley grains, cuts a few hairs from the animal, and throws them in the fire. What I'm describing is a typical blood sacrifice from ancient Greece. We know all these details thanks to painstaking study of ancient texts and artifacts, and a particularly vivid recreation of the rite can be found in a now classic work, Homo Necans, which translates from Latin into killing human, killing man. It was first published in 1972 by a German scholar, Walter Burkhardt, with a follow-up in a more general book, Greek Religion, published five years later in 1977. So if the animal is large, like an ox, it's first stunned with an axe, then its head is lifted up, and an officiant cuts its throat. And Burkhardt writes, the blood is collected in a basin, sprayed over the altar and against the sides. To stain the altar with blood, hymasein in Greek. You can see there this root hymo or hemo, where we get words like hemophilia or hemoglobin. To stain the altar with blood, hymasein, is a pious duty. As the fatal blow falls, the women must cry out in high, shrill tones. The Greek custom of the sacrificial cry marks the emotional climax. Life screams over death. And he also writes, the victims which are pleasing to the gods are warm-blooded animals, mostly large animals. Fish, though much more important for everyday sustenance, this is Greece and the Greek islands, are rarely, if ever, sacrificed. What counts is the warm running blood, which arouses fear and suspicion. Participants skin, butcher, and roast the animal's remains, all according to rules established long before anyone can remember. Occasionally, the heart is torn out while still beating from the body. Then the participants ceremoniously put the body back together by putting the bones back in place, and there's a communal feast. And Burkhardt writes of this ceremony, the shock of the terrors of death present in the warm flowing blood strikes home directly, not as some painful adjunct, but as the very center towards which all eyes are directed. And yet, in the subsequent feast, the encounter with death is transformed into life-affirming enjoyment. So, what I've just been describing, this kind of weird and gruesome event, as it seems to us, was a part of normal life in ancient Greece, civilization that many of us in the modern West have and continue to look back on a sort of paragon of humanism and rationalism. It's the civilization that gave us Socrates and Aristotle, Euclid, Pythagoras, Pericles, and Plato, of course. Democracy, science. Art that was constantly striving to show the beauty of the human form. To us, it might not be easy to reconcile these things, and I think Burckhardt was aware that his book might shock some people. The blood sacrifice, which was actually central to Greek religion, can almost seem too weird to be true, not just because of the violence that was central to it, also in that it's full of practices that to us seem random or just bizarre, not aimed at any practical use or to satisfy any apparent natural desire. But of course, ancient Greece isn't the only human culture that contains this strange mix of elements. In an earlier episode, we talked about these attributes that we humans seem to define us. Reason, we speak of ourselves as the rational animal, and there's this scientific name, Homo sapiens or sapiens, the knowing animal, that seems to differentiate us from others in our genus by our capacity to reason and know. But religion has been about as universal to humanity as reason, actually. And I think it's fair to say that religion is universally weird. Blood sacrifice, for example, has been an extremely common practice in religion around the world. Even our modern technological culture, this post-Enlightenment culture of ours in the West that so many of us assume to be humanistic and rationalistic, springs from this Christian culture. And as we know, a central element of Christian rite is the ritualistic eating of the god, the drinking of his blood. And places of Christian worship are decorated with images of torture. I think it's fair to say that by modern secular standards, religion throughout its history has been quite cruel. Think of human sacrifice and all the countless cruel strictures that it seems to place on human behavior, human life. You may have heard of the Vestal Virgins, these priestesses of ancient Rome. They were buried alive, for example, if they lost their virginity, and their sexual partners were beaten to death according to Roman custom. And of course, apart from these gruesome and cruel things, there's much to religion that just seems irrational in ways that may not be harmful, but just seem sort of arbitrary and odd. Rules around diet, for example. In some ways, religion can appear just ridiculous or worse to the modern mind. You may remember a few episodes ago we talked about Freud's book Civilization and its Discontents, where he talks a bit about he develops his theory of the origin of religion, and he writes there that religion is, quote, so patently infantile, so foreign to reality that to anyone with a friendly attitude to humanity, it is painful to think that the great majority of mortals will never be able to rise above this view of life. And this was written in the 1920s before not going to church became sort of mainstream in the West. So what's going on? Why is something like this proved universally popular among humanity to the point where it persists in our own time, centuries after the Enlightenment? I think one difficulty in answering this question is that religion itself won't give us the answer we want. The ancient Greek philosopher Theophrastus wrote of the blood sacrifice, for example, quote, there are three reasons one ought to sacrifice to the gods, either on account of honor, to honor the gods, or account of gratitude, or on account of a want of things, so to ask something of the gods. So I think that shows how the logic of religion has been kind of circular. The rationale for it, when given, assumes you're already religious. But this kind of answer, of course, won't satisfy most of us in our time. We want to know if a secular answer can be found. In other words, does religion have a natural cause? There are lots of theories for this, of course, but I want to close today with something that struck me once as a journalist when I was interviewing an Anglican priest who had done a lot of mission work among motorcycle gangs. And it seems he, in fact, was responsible for the conversion to Christianity of the head of the Ontario chapter of the Rock Machine. If you're Canadian and of a certain age, you may remember the Rock Machine was a gang that found itself in a bloody feud with the Hells Angels in Quebec in the 1990s and early 2000s. Anyway, this priest said that one difficulty of his work was that a lot of bikers were reluctant to enter a church because he said they felt weirded out by it. I think in this context, it's worth thinking of the etymology of the word weird, which in Middle English meant having power to control fate. In a certain sense, to weird people out, I think, is the point of religion. At least religion must, by its nature, be weird, I think. Once it ceases to be weird, it ceases to be religion, because the whole point of it is to take us to an altered state of consciousness and to tap into a special kind of cognition, and I think you could say a special kind of power. And that's what we'll look at in more detail next episode. So thanks again for watching, and hope to see you next time.